with the first panel. For that, I want to invite the first three panelists on stage. We have Naomi, we have Gabriela, and we have Sophie. If you could come here, pick your places. And maybe just a few quick words on what we'll be covering now to start with. So right now I talked about companies becoming more global from the get-go. I think like right now teams are also becoming more international with that. And of course you have to design everything around accordingly. It doesn't get easier, even though there's a big benefit to that. And so I would really love to speak about that in the next 30 minutes. I think there's a lot of ground that we can cover. So maybe we can first start with a quick intro.
Yes, right. Sorry, that awkward moment. My name's Naomi Trickey, as you can see. I am the Chief People Officer for a company called Mews. We provide hospitality software, so for hotels. I tried to figure out exactly how many locations we have people in yesterday evening as I was preparing for this, and I failed. So many locations, but 7 offices, 900 employees. We're around Series C, so we did Series C end of last year. So that's a bit about us.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gabi. I am VP People at Topi. It's a German-founded organization. We're about 35 at the minute. We help businesses simplify their infrastructure and hardware procurement through renting instead of flat-out buying. And we currently have a team, an office in Berlin, but a team distributed across Europe. For example, I'm in London, as you can see.
Hi, I'm Sophie Amato. I head up People Experience for Social Value Portal. SVP is a venture-backed Series B Corp, but essentially we're a social impact company with a platform and a framework that allows our customers to track, measure and report on social value they create for their communities. We are headquartered in the UK with various offices and people doing hybrid working, but we're actually on a mission to go global from next year. So I'm coming to this panel with a slightly new, well, a pre-perspective, should we say, hoping to learn a bit more about moving people across borders.
Perfect. Thank you. And to dive right in, we spoke about it. The future of work looks more international, and like no matter if you have different locations and an international team, or if you're in one location and just have different nationalities, the complexity is there. What does that mean for your day-to-day jobs? What are the biggest challenges that you're facing?
So we have a team of 117 people, but in that group we have 16 nationalities. So we begin that with tracking things like EDI data from the point of hiring. And really, so the very small people team that we have can create more meaningful experiences, starting with belonging from day one. So that could be small adjustments around, for example, working hours for those who are observing Ramadan, or making time and space for prayer. But it's just enabling us to craft experiences that are actually meaningful for the individual based on who we're bringing into the business.
Okay. It's going to be a very polite panel, as you can tell. I mean, it's such a big question, obviously, and there's so many challenges that I know we face, and I'm sure you're all facing. So I won't list them all because we'll be here all day. But one of the things that we find really challenging is onboarding people. So we have something called NHO, New Hire Onboarding. It's in Prague, which is where our headquarters are, at the beginning of every single month. The administrative overload is pretty hefty, obviously, but it's so significant in terms of its impact. And then we do homecoming, which is every employee is allowed to go to Prague for up to 10 days a year to kind of connect back in to the mothership, as it were. So that's getting people in, but it's also maintaining that sort of relationship can be very complex, and building communities when, you know, beanbags just don't cut it anymore, and the expectations of our employees are so much higher than they used to be in this regard. On the other hand, they've gone down in other areas. So as far as I'm concerned, it's swings and roundabouts. And as far as I'm concerned personally, I can't imagine not working globally. So it's a game changer. It's been a game changer for me and my career. And so I would never, ever expect anyone not to work globally. It's a joy.
Yeah, I think it's, as Naomi mentioned, it is challenging, but it can also be incredibly rewarding. I think the challenges come with, you have people in different cultures. From previous times where I worked in places where we had different offices and we had different nationalities within an office, you now have people who are not working from an office, they're working from their home country. The expectations, even things like, the way HR policies or employment law works, sometimes they nudge people towards certain things, and I think we need to be extremely aware of that and how that brings into your culture. So what we try to do is we try to understand, where are people coming from? People will come with different expectations. People will coming with different, life circumstances, in life experiences, and try to embed a way of working that, we are all in it together. So we do have an office in Berlin, but we do operate in a very remote way to make sure that people don't feel like if you're not in the office in Berlin or if you're not spending time there, you're not part of the team, you're not part of decision making, you're not part of communication, because that is extremely important. And me as a VP people, I'm in London. I don't need to be in Berlin all the time. So building those ways and then connecting with employees, I think understanding how do different people in different countries and different nationalities and different ways, personalities like to connect, because not everyone will like a pub quiz or stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I think that you touch on a really interesting point, which is that this future of work that we find ourselves sort of thrown into has really acted as a provocation to employers to actually do things better and differently. And what I'm seeing in my sort of network of people is an increased push for transparency, but also as a corollary of that, increased levels of sharing and collaboration, which is such a joy. So I'm just thinking when you were talking about policies, about openpolicy.fyi, I think. I'm not sure if any of you've seen it, but it is unbelievably useful. And it is all policies that companies, you can just drop your policies in for any location, because as you say, if you're operating globally, it's a nightmare trying to localize. There we go.
No, and policies is a very interesting one also from my own experience. Like sometimes there is a bit of testing around, like you need to put out MVPs, but then you also see things that don't work, then you have to roll it back. And so it's similar to founding a company. Like you try something, you build a product, then you have to iterate. And so really that, the space of options is just so much bigger.
Absolutely.
Maybe also doubling down on impact on the team. There is a factor of also, of course, cultural differences, making international teams click together. That book, I don't know if you've read it, The Culture Map, where you talk about like also how's feedback given. There is sometimes friction points in things where you haven't expected them, and that's just another challenge. How do you get the team on board for that? Like what are you doing to also enable the team to like really work together in the most efficient way?
So for us, it starts, this is going to sound so cheesy, so brace yourself, but for us it starts with our core values, one of them being, one of them is collaboration, transparency, accountability, but the other one is community. So again, that's sort of reflective of what we do for our customers and them a bit helping them create social value in their communities. But from an internal perspective, we want to create this, this sense of community and belonging. So embedding that value from the beginning of the employee experience is what that's about for us. And drilling into that value, we've created principles that sit behind it. So the principles, the ways of working, ways of communicating, ways of solving problems. It's not, a scientific map of how to behave. It's just a guideline. But we want everyone to buy into that guideline from day one so that we know that we're sort of fostering this this cohesive culture. So really that's kind of where it starts for us, and we try then to embed that into every touch point that an employee experiences.
Yeah, I think that is really, really important. And bringing it, even like when we're hiring, understanding where people, how open they are to others. How have they dealt when they disagreed with someone? How have they dealt giving or receiving feedback? I think that's very important, because there will be moments where you need to, have conversations around, there are different expectations. And I often have it, we actually mentioned Culture Map quite a few times, and I sometimes end up having really interesting conversations with my team in one-to-ones, my team, the Topi team, exactly because of that, because we use it as a kind of a tool to understand that we're coming from different cultures, we communicate in different ways, we reach a decision in different ways. Sometimes we have different relationships with conflict. It doesn't mean that I'm Portuguese and I'll, you get to the book and you're like, I'm totally Portuguese. Maybe not. But it's just offering a tool that people can have a common language around. And it's creating that awareness that we are different, but we all aim for the same thing. We all want to, have Topi be successful, but we all want to belong. We all want to have a voice. And we're reaching to the same goal. So, for example, when I was talking about social belonging, one of the exercises I've done with my team, and it was very eye-opening, was I got everyone to collaborate thinking about how do you connect? And you will get people, kind of joked on the quiz thing, but you'll get people who really connect through very social activities. You'll get people who will call that plan fun, to be very nice about it. You'll have people who say, I connect when I'm working on something very specific with someone else. And then being able to have a conversation with your colleague that the way you like to connect, or the way you like to give feedback, or the way you like to communicate is in this way, helps you avoid those conflicts and often plain misunderstandings.
Yes, I think you both make really excellent points. I guess when I was thinking about this question last night, the first thing that came to my mind is no team clicks all by themselves, right? No one. I mean, at least I'm not aware of one. And if you know one, please tell me, and I would love to know more. The reality is that it doesn't matter ultimately where they're from. There is work that needs to go into building a team and building a culture. It has to be intentional. The analogy I really like, and I talk to hiring managers about this, and is the sort of grit in the oyster. You need that grit in order to have to get the pearl, right? And diversity of thought, diversity in all its forms can be incredibly constructive, but it requires managing. And so I would say, as well as the things that you're both doing, which we're doing as well, management enablement cannot be underestimated, because it's hard building a team, and it is hard regardless of where people live and what culture they come from. So for me, the one thing that I would make sure that you're doing is enabling your managers to facilitate difference, because it's worth it.
And just to add something to that, you sparked something when you mentioned it, Gabby. Appreciating that people have different ways of wanting to be communicated with or wanting to collaborate. We actually have, as part of our onboarding process, we add a little note to people's profile on our HR system, so that if someone does want to approach someone for the first time, someone they've not spoken to before, they would just have a quick look at the little tab. That person could be living with ADHD, and the thought of having a phone call out of nowhere you would not get the best out of them in that instance. So sort of moving away from talking about international borders, but it does lend itself to that sense of belonging. So we know that we can tailor our approach to suit every individual to therefore get the most out of that collaboration. Yeah.
And you touched on a very important point there, because designing for the individual and having that option. I think one aspect that is very interesting is what is something that you need to design for everyone, and like where do you make exceptions for us? One example is when you also talk about mobility options and like short-term mobility, let's say. One thing that we thought about, if you approach it in general and say, okay, everyone can work from another place for like 2 weeks within Europe, maybe longer. Compliance is also a thing. But then you have someone that's an expat that comes from another country. When they want to go home, do you stretch that? And so there is also an argument for like really making differences, but then how granular do you go? And what would be your approach in terms of like designing kind of like one size fits it all versus like really trying to go individual?
So I think that the sort of clue is in the question, really, that it's different people have different needs. I've just said my position on that. Diversity is extremely important. So rather than trying to pretend that diversity doesn't exist, what I would do is aim for equitability. So if you've spent any time thinking about diversity, you'll be aware of this concept. So it's bringing everyone up to the same level, but everyone needs something different to get them to that same level. It's not about providing the same thing for everybody, because some people already have a layer of privilege. They don't need the offering that you're giving them to the same extent that someone else does. So the best use of your resources, because I'm assuming that you're all in the same boat that I am, which is you don't have endless resource to put into supporting your people, is to be judicious. Think about what individuals or groups of individuals need. And then the second thing is build communities of belonging. So it's about creating those connections across culture. So we have ERGs, employee resource groups. The neurodiversity one is increasingly sort of popular and engaging and, live, really. But, women at Mews and so on and so forth. Those are just two things that I think about.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think experience is different for different people, just as you said, right? Like you will have different expectations, even when we think about mobility, and if we think, for example, of preparing benefits, to be competitive in terms of the benefits you're giving individuals, people will look at different things in the UK that they look in Germany, that they look in Spain. So you can't have, or you shouldn't have a one-size-fit-all, because you might be very competitive here in the UK offering certain things, and then in Spain they're going to be like, what? Right? So it's one is understanding what is important for people, and as you mentioned, groups of people. And second is listening to what do people in your team need and value. And you might not be able to give everything, but at least you can communicate back on why did you decide certain things and what else can you do. And there are things like flexibility in some of our like kind of global policies or general policies that we can give that might not cost us that much, but will mean a lot to people who might be in certain circumstances.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think something we've done recently, we tried to do, a number of surveys without giving people, fatigue. But a recent survey told me that 73% out of all of our employee benefits, 73% of our team value benefits that fall into the flexibility category more than anything else, above health and well-being even. So it's data like that helps the PX team to create initiatives that are actually going to have an impact. And it can be really daunting for a UK-based entity to even think about going global and, where do we start? How do we even do that? So coming from that space myself, my advice would just be to start small, test the water, see how it goes. So looking from an individual basis, that's exactly what we started to do last year. We do have a high number of our team who, have family in other countries. So introducing little policies like, you can extend your Christmas leave by 2 weeks to spend a month with your family, work for 2 weeks abroad in the summer. Or actually, we have just done a recent relocation for somebody whose husband was relocated. So we obviously want to support them. We want to keep that specialist knowledge in-house. Why wouldn't we? And if it means that much to 73% of our team, it's a no-brainer to help support those initiatives. So we started small, we tested the waters, we took a bit more feedback, we iterated, we adjusted the process and the policy, and it seems to be working well. So I think if you have a sort of a baseline of where you want to go, then start small and explore that and see where it goes.
I was just going to say, we've just done a big survey as well, and what we found is that our remote workers are more engaged than our office-based workers. So it works.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Also, if things weren't complicated enough, there's been some major changes in the last 3-4 years. I mentioned some in my keynote. Really like that, the fact that also companies and employees are still figuring out where they're sitting in that range between fully remote and in office, what is the company's range of things that they offer, but also employees' preferences, and how has that affected your way of working? Also in terms of what are things that we're already building, what are things that we're testing, where we're still in MVP phase?
Shall I go first? Yeah. So, yeah, as you say, it's a work in progress, and Mews has been remote now for 3 years, and we're remote friendly, and the majority of our employees really at least hybrid. So we've been thinking about it for a long time, and it is a work in progress. There's 2 things I would say that we're doing that are sort of particularly front of mind. The first is I'm thinking really hard about the rituals that we have within our organisation. I'm really nerdily fascinated by anthropology, and this is a concept that I've sort of taken from there. But the rituals, like our all hands, so our all hands is a really big deal. It's called the boosh, play on words, amuse, boosh. And we share all the company data within this, so transparency in terms of that within the boosh. Everyone attends, so you get, as long as time zones allow, so 600 people, it's fully remote. But this is a ritual that it has a Slack chat going on at the same time. It can feel a bit gladiatorial because we also have Hanna time where anyone can ask any question of anyone. Yep, so that took a bit of getting used to when I started. But that sort of transparency and dialogue with your employees. And then the second thing, engagement data. Use engagement data intentionally. And what I mean by that is build a calendar of communication around your engagement data so that people trust that what they tell you will get acted on. Yeah. Now, I could talk for hours about how to do that effectively so that you don't end up with a big shopping list of, things that your employees expect you to do. But essentially, what is your communication calendar around your engagement data? Build it. You can keep it simple, but make sure that you use it to build trust and increase that sort of openness and dialogue.
So we are, even though we have an office, as I mentioned, we operate pretty much as a remote team. So some of the things that we've been doing right now, and I think this is where you can really ask your team for support, especially in my case, I'm a single person people team, is understand areas. So I used engagement surveys to understand what are key pain points in the ways we're working or the ways we're collaborating, especially as later in the year we added a lot of new joiners, and everyone comes with different expectations from previous locations and previous places they worked. So things like, making sure that how are we communicating? What are expectations around communication? How do we meet? How do we gather? And what do we expect from when we are meeting, whether that is in person and we run twice a year offsites, or whether that is in small groups, or whether that is virtually most of the time. So we try to create these touch points. So we also have all hands. We have a session on kind of what we built to talk about, actually celebrate what the teams have been doing as well, beyond the big updates. And we try to create more moments of communication because also what we've noticed from feedback as well is sometimes the more remote you are, it's easier for people to feel less visibility to leadership. So we actually encourage a lot of visibility, and our founders are particularly good at making sure they're keeping everyone up to date. And we've launched a kind of a founder AMA where everyone can ask questions direct on the spot, and we can have those conversations. So making sure that you have continuous touch points, so everyone feels connected to each other and to leadership, and they understand where the business is going.
Yeah, in a similar way, I think feedback has become a really key theme of this panel. But yeah, based on feedback that we received, we created our first inclusion committee. We wanted representation from each team to make sure that we were really kind of covering the entire business. And as a result of that team, we now have our sort of calendar of touch points throughout the year. We know that we're not going to be able to cover everything all the time, but that's okay because we've analysed what is the maximum sort of output that will have the best impact, and that's our sort of guiding star for the PX team. So we know that Black History Month, that we're halfway through currently, it means a lot to our employees. So that very small inclusion committee has created a whole suite of recommendations, comms, initiatives, PowerPoints, a quiz. Our October social will be based around Black History Month as well. So I can't remember what prompted me to think of that actually. So that taking the feedback that you have, using that data to your advantage to create the sense of belonging and inclusion. But something that we are also trialing as an MVP is this transparency around salary bandings. I know that that's a bit of a hot topic at the moment too. But it was linked to, again, the survey. People told us that they wanted more transparency around where they could grow within the company, what that next move will be, what the banding will start at, what their responsibilities and duties and scope will involve. And so we've created a framework actually based on some more of the open sourced information that we spoke about earlier. God bless Notion, honestly. And thank you, Learnably, for open sourcing all of that. And so that's what we're just trialing at the moment. So transparency and clarity is absolutely fundamental at the moment.
Perfect, thank you. Now, looking a bit into global mobility, selfishly, how do you see like relocations, short-term mobility, business trips, and like everything around the flexibility of location, enabling people across borders? How do you see that coming into?
So it's definitely front of mind for next year. So it's a really interesting one. I think the initiatives that we've been able to roll out so far have been quite telling in how much more engaged the people are who are involved with that, because we're just enabling them, and enablement creates this sense of empowerment. Empowerment creates, a productivity. It's a simple formula that works. So we're looking to open our first international office, I think, within Europe next year. We will look at, I think the process of that in itself will be quite eye-opening, but I think it's definitely an exciting time for SVP.
I think you mentioned before, I think the expectations of people regarding mobility have completely changed. I don't think since COVID, even before, I was in a company, we offered some working from abroad, and it was like mind-blowing. Since COVID, it's almost like people expect you to have some time where you're kind of working from abroad within compliance limits, etc. So I think that is a very big point, and I think where sometimes there's a struggle is like, how do you know you're being compliant? Sometimes you don't have those resources to go and check, for a longer term. So I think solutions for that are really, really helpful to understand the risk. And I see a lot of our team wanting to actually go and work with other people in other countries. So as I mentioned, we're a little bit across Europe, and I've had people say, "Can I move after you've been for years with your organization?" So there are still, especially if you're a global organization. I mean, this was also true before, but there are people who will consider, well, if you have an office in San Francisco or if you have an office in Barcelona, would I be able to move there? And I think what the current years have given is that not always, but sometimes you allow for more roles to be outside of certain centers, whereas before you might have had, San Francisco only had sales, didn't have tech. Therefore, why would you send someone from tech there? So I think it's getting a lot of more flexibility, and I think it's really important for you to keep competitive when you're making offers and also to retain your talent.
Yeah, it's so hard. One of the comms meetings I mentioned we had with our APAC team last Thursday, and they were asking about the possibility of promotion, because obviously it's not a huge team, and they're really, why can't we do a job? A product management job. It's a commercial office, as I'm sure most of you have, experienced. And there is no answer, because the reality is, and this has always been the case, even pre-COVID in my experience, the pace of people's ambition will always exceed the rate of growth of any organisation, unless you work for a huge corporate. Like, there are not enough promotions around, essentially. So what do we do at Mews? Well, we try and be honest and transparent about it, obviously, and about what's possible. We try to think about lateral growth as well as vertical growth, standard things. We try to. I've been thinking a lot about productivity. How do you measure productivity when people aren't visibly busy? And it's a complex thing for people teams. It tends to be about thinking in a much more nuanced way about how we understand engagement. 10 years ago when I started being a Chief People Officer, it was ENPS and that was it. And I've seen a negative correlation between ENPS and people staying at a company. So it doesn't align, essentially. So you need to think in a much more nuanced way. And then the final thing I'd say is that you leverage technology. So you get people together, obviously, off-sites. Leadership team at Mews, we meet in person every 6 weeks. But also we leverage technology. So we're big fans of Loom, for example, and the video updates. It's fantastic. And we have a sort of mantra, which is you brief people asynchronously, but you debate synchronously. And that's a sort of model that we have, because global mobility is not going anywhere. Oh, and we have a global mobility policy as well, obviously. I'm happy to share it with people. It took a long time to create.
I can imagine.
So if anyone's interested, let me know.
Perfect. Final question to wrap up. We've talked a bit about everything that's changing. I feel like we're not 100% through that change. What is your prediction for next year? What are the big things that are still changing?
I mean, it's an almost impossible question to answer, but I feel like the only thing that is constant is change. And unless you are building flexibility into your strategy, not only in terms of how you grow the business, but also in terms of how you run your people functions and how you apply, So I'm thinking, I'll get specific. I'm thinking about this management enablement program that we've just launched. It's built with flexibility in mind. So we run for every topic. It's a 2.5-hour workshop. We have a calendar of them that run through the year, and each topic runs 5 times in different time zones. You have to be doing things like that. I know it's resource heavy, but the expense of not doing it is because, as I said, managers enabled, they're your greatest asset. So build flexibility into absolutely everything you do.
So I would love to be able to say next year I see everyone going global and isn't it going to be amazing? But the slightly bleak approach I'm just going to leave everyone with is that I sense a bit of a battle, to be honest, next year, because there are some really innovative companies who are taking this approach of providing flexibility, putting global first. As we said, it's a must, not a nice to have, and I'm fully behind that principle. The people that I've been speaking to in my network who are actively looking for VP of people roles, within tech businesses, here or overseas, are struggling because half the market wants to go back to that sort of 9 to 5, 5 days a week, as much in-person time as possible, and it's a real battle for them. So I think there is this. I'm getting a sense that post-COVID, a lot of people are wanting just to go back to how things were. That was a blip. Let's just get things back on track. There's nothing more productive than an in-person meeting, in their eyes. Whereas the other half of the market is very much, on this sort of international, global first approach. So it's going to be interesting. I think that's why things like the studies, the reports, the data are so vital in proving that remote first teams are the most engaged. So I'm ready. Yeah, bring it on.
Yeah, it's really hard to anticipate. I see almost like two sides of it. There's companies who are growing again, and that's like a lot of hiring. There's companies who might not be growing that much, and you are being much more conscious about resources and where you place them. If I was to turn the question and ask what would I like to see a little bit, and I hope we're going in that direction. One is the manager enablement, I think is extremely important. And if I think back to where I was in 2020, I don't think I would have gone that year with that team and supporting them as well if I didn't have great managers or in the organization supporting people. I think the other element for it, and especially if we're in a market where people might start hiring but not go back to 2021 or 2022 where it was hiring frenzy, I think there's going to be a lot more emphasis on personal growth and development, because you need to retain people and you need to engage them to be productive. So you need to have really good managers who can have really good conversations that sometimes will be quite difficult because the promotion might not be there. But how do you help people still develop, still get ready for when the role is there, or potentially for a role that might not be in your organization, might be elsewhere, but people still leave with a very good relationship with your organization. It still contribute to their self.
I think, sorry, could I just say something? Because I was reading, the point is that flexibility will help with all of that. It will help with productivity. It will help with growth. It will help with hiring. And if you don't believe me, Claudia Goldin just won the Nobel Prize last week, making that point that for women, for example, in the workplace, and she's been studying the data for decades, flexibility is the key to career growth. And so we're all wringing our hands going, how do we solve the gender pay gap? And it's like, well, we make sure that we get women into the workplace. That is how we do this. And we find a way to do that. And that's what flexibility does.
Very, very interesting. I know we didn't have time for Q&A now, but in the coffee break afterwards, I'm sure you'll be able to ask some questions. But big thanks. Very insightful. I learned a lot again. And I'll be handing over the reins now.